The government's flagship named person policy came under fire again this week following the conviction of Rachel and Naomi Fee for the murder of Rachel's 2-year-old son Liam. He was killed at the family's home in Fife, one of the areas in Scotland which is piloting a similar initiative. A serious case review has been announced to look into the exact circumstances surrounding the toddler's death, but questions about whether he had a single point of contact worker have been met with accusations of political posturing. A short while ago, I spoke to the Children's Commissioner, Tam Baillie, who has written in a newspaper about this issue. Now, the Liam Fee case, but obviously very tragic case. You wrote an article in the Sunday Times about it today. The third sentence of that article says, and I quote, that Liam's death has been used by some as a means of furthering a campaign against the named person service is unforgivable because the tragic loss of a child should be above political posturing. What do you mean?
The reason is two reasons. First of all, Liam Fee's death is an absolute tragedy and it affects the individuals involved, the communities, and indeed the whole workforce that's involved in that. And the sad fact is that no child protection service in the world can offer assurances that it will be fail-safe. So that's the first thing. This is a real tragedy.
Okay.
The second thing is, though, is the named person. The named person service is really a low-level early warning system for where things are at an early stage of going wrong in a child's life. And I can't comment on the details of the Liam Fee case, but what we do know is that this was a child that was known to social work. And that puts that case, that incident, that child way beyond the level of named person.
I do understand that, and I do take your point. But what about the facts of this case? Fife was a pilot area for the named person scheme, wasn't it?
Yeah, but regardless of whether Liam Fee had a named person or not...
But did he?
I can't say. I don't know, because I don't know the ins and outs of the case. But what I would say is that this is a child who was in a system where it was obvious that he was way beyond that early intervention, that early warning. He was in a parent system.
I get the point, but why don't you know?
Well, because I can't comment on the details of the case.
You could have contacted Fife Council and said what exactly were the arrangements in place?
Well, it wasn't my job to try and find the arrangements in place for that. There's going to be a significant case review. And I also said in the article that we have to let the people who are running the significant case review to look at the totality of the actions that were taken and to identify where the errors were made in terms of the handling of that case.
Don't you think that before you wrote an article in a national newspaper saying people were indulging in political posturing and that their behaviour was unforgivable, as the Children's Commissioner for Scotland, it might have been a good idea for you to contact Fife Council and the Scottish Government and ascertain the facts of the case?
But even if there's a named person for Liam Fee, that really is not the point in terms of that child being known to social work, which means that there should have been systems in place to ensure the safety of that child rather than as the named person.
I think we understand that. John Swinney the other day, the Deputy First Minister, he said there was a person, a point of contact, but not in terms of the legislation, was what he said. Do you know what that means?
I presume that he's saying that there was a person who's a point of contact somewhere with regard to the handling of the child protection case, but I can't comment on whether there was a named person allocated.
Again, I put it to you, many people watching this will say, well, hang on a minute, this guy is the Children's Commissioner for Scotland. He's writing articles in national newspapers condemning people for asking questions apropos of this case about the named person legislation. And he hasn't even bothered to find out what the facts are.
I'm saying that it's wrong for us to link the named person with incidences of children who are well enmeshed in the system and whether there's failings there or not. Now, there are debates around named person about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing or not, but that's quite separate from those children who are already identified where there are serious concerns, and we'll find from the significant case review as to where those failings actually took place in this instance.
Look, the bottom line here is that the named person scheme is being piloted in places like the Highlands. It's being piloted in Fife. If there was a named person in this case, even a named person, but not in terms of the legislation, as John Swinney put it, quite clearly it's not worked.
But named person, as I said earlier, is not meant to be dealing with those children who have already been identified where there are serious concerns, where there should be children's plan around it, where there should be a number of different agencies. The named person is really that early point.
Again, I accept your point that it might not be strictly relevant in terms of this case because this child was known to social services.
Absolutely. Yes.
But the fact is, what's at stake here is a flagship policy of the Scottish Government. And I fail to understand why, first of all, you haven't tried to find out what is actually happening here. And secondly, why it's simply not relevant to talk about the named person. I mean, you describe people who've been talking about this as behaving unforgivably. What on earth do you mean?
In the first instance, excuse me. In the first instance, it has to be left to the serious case review to establish the facts of the case. And I also make that point in the article. The second one is that we know, and I repeat, the named person is not designed to try to assist those children where we already know there are very serious concerns, where there should be people who are working around the case, who should actually have vigilance in terms of protecting that child.
As the Children's Commissioner, you had contacted Fife Council and said, I want to know exactly what happened here. Of course, quite rightly, they would have said, and you would have agreed with them, no, look, there's a significant case review going on.
Yes.
We can't prejudge that.
Yes.
However, if as the Children's Commissioner you'd said, look, one of the main issues coming up here is the named person legislation. Can you just tell me what the situation was here? I'm not prejudging your review, and it may be that the named person legislation is not relevant to this. Was there a named person in this case? Was it the full service, or was it, as John Swinney says, a limited version of it, whatever that means? But you don't seem to have done either of these things.
As I've already said, in this instance, the circumstances, the level of protection that's required, the level of service that this child required is way beyond that which would be provided
I understand
through
that, but the point I'm getting at is lack of transparency. If this is a flagship government scheme, why can't the government just say, this is exactly what the situation was, and that's that?
Yeah, I think there's a point in terms of the debate that's around named person. I think there's been a lot of expectation placed on somehow named person being able to deal with all instances of concerns around children. And part of the reason that I've written the article is that that's just not the case. What it will do, it will flag up at an early...
I still don't understand who's behaving unforgivably, by the way.
Well, for people that are using the named person...
Is anyone doing that?
Well, I think people have been linking the named person somehow with the terrible
people have been asking
of
questions about it, which is perfectly reasonable.
Well, but there's also been a direct link made in terms of named person and Liam Fee. And the point I'm making is that named person is an early intervention. It's meant to be picking up children at an early stage where there are concerns around the child, rather than those children where we have to be intervening in the basis of child protection.
Last point. Some charities have claimed that the named person scheme, at least in the Highland area, has been a success. Given the opacity surrounding this case, how are the public supposed to judge whether these pilot schemes are a success or not? How on earth can we know?
Yeah, and I think there is an issue about presentation of what the named person scheme, named person service is meant to do. It's there as an early pickup. We are concerned about children who...
But how are we, the public, meant to judge if it's a success or not?
I think there is a presentation issue that the government need to address in terms of presenting the expectations on named person and what it will reasonably do. We have concerns about children who we don't pick up early enough, and problems then exacerbate.
Okay.
If we
All
get
right.
in early, then we can actually assist children and families at that stage.
All right, Tam Baillie. Luke, thank you very much indeed.